The calm before the tide, the morning sun stretched across the blue horizon, painting the quiet ocean with streaks of gold. Soft waves brushed against the side of the yacht as seagulls cried in the distance. Keanu Reeves stood near the edge, hands resting on the polished railing, eyes fixed on the endless water ahead. He had always loved the ocean. To him, it was a reminder that peace existed somewhere between silence and movement. This trip wasn't about luxury or fame. It was about finding stillness. But he didn't expect who would join him that morning. Sandra Bullock appeared from the cabin barefoot, her hair lifted slightly by the breeze. She carried 2 mugs of coffee and smiled when she saw him. There was a familiar comfort between them, the kind that comes only from years of shared memories. They had worked together, laughed together, and drifted apart like ships after a storm. But today, after years of quiet distance, they had decided to take a small trip together. No cameras, no interviews, no spotlight, just them and the sea. Keanu took 1 mug and nodded softly. "Thanks," he said, his voice calm but low, almost drowned by the sound of the ocean. Sandra leaned beside him, both staring at the horizon. For a while, there were no words, only the rhythm of waves tapping against the yacht's hull. "You still love the quiet, don't you?" she asked after a moment. He smiled faintly. "The quiet's the only thing that listens." She laughed, but her eyes carried a gentle sadness. It had been years since they had spoken like this. Hollywood had its way of separating people. Different schedules, different worlds, endless noise. And yet here they were again, standing side by side as if no time had passed. Beneath the calm, however, Keanu carried something heavy inside him, something he hadn't told anyone. It wasn't fame that exhausted him. It was the weight of loss, the way silence sometimes reminded him of the people he could no longer call. He wanted this trip to be healing, not haunted. "It's been a long time," Sandra whispered. "I miss this." He turned slightly toward her. "Me too." The yacht's captain, an old man with sunburnt skin and wise eyes, called out from the helm. "We'll be passing the cliffs soon. Beautiful view there." Keanu nodded in thanks, but something in his tone carried a thought he didn't voice. Beauty often carried reminders. The cliffs reminded him of the last trip he took before everything changed, the one that ended in silence and regret. As the yacht moved forward, the ocean began to shift. Gentle waves thickened into uneven ripples, and a faint wind whispered through the sails. Sandra noticed it first. "The sea's changing," she said, glancing toward the horizon. "Just the tide," Keanu replied, but his eyes stayed fixed on the darkening patches far ahead. Nature had its moods, and he respected that. Yet a part of him felt uneasy, though he couldn't say why. Inside the cabin, photographs lined one small shelf. The captain had once been a sailor who collected pictures from every journey. One, however, caught Sandra's attention. A faded photo of a man and woman holding a small child near the same cliffs they were approaching now. She turned to ask the captain about it, but he was steering, his expression distant, almost guarded. As the boat swayed lightly, Sandra placed the photo back carefully. "He's been sailing a long time," she murmured. Keanu nodded. "Some people spend their whole life trying to escape land." Her eyes softened. "And others spend it trying to reach it." They both smiled, but the wind grew stronger, interrupting the calm. The sails flapped sharply and the captain adjusted his grip. Keanu set down his mug and stepped forward, instinctively helping to tighten a loose rope. He moved with quiet focus, the same calm presence that had always defined him. When the waves steadied again, Sandra exhaled slowly. "You never panic," she said. "Even when things go wrong." He gave a small shrug. "Panic doesn't fix the sea." There was something about the way he said it, like he was speaking about more than water. Sandra knew that look. She had seen it years ago when he was going through pain, but never let it show. She wanted to ask, but the timing felt wrong. Instead, she just stood beside him, letting the silence speak. As noon approached, the sun glimmered above, but the air held a strange tension. The captain slowed the yacht near the cliffs. Below, the water shimmered turquoise, clear enough to see the shadowy forms of rocks beneath. It was breathtaking, almost unreal. Sandra took out her phone to take a photo, but then hesitated. This moment felt too personal for pictures. "Looks peaceful," she said quietly. Keanu nodded, but his expression changed suddenly. Something far off in the distance caught his attention. A small object drifting in the waves, a broken piece of wood, then another, then a floating life vest. His breath slowed. "Captain," he called out, "stop the boat." The old man reacted immediately, pulling the throttle back. Sandra looked confused. "What is it?" Keanu pointed. "Something's out there." They all leaned forward. The water carried fragments, splintered boards, fabric, and something else. A signal flare tube floated past, unlit. The captain's face turned pale. "That's recent," he muttered. "Very recent." Without hesitation, Keanu grabbed a rope and lowered the small rescue dinghy that hung on the side. "Keanu, wait," Sandra said, her voice tense. "You don't know what's out there." "Someone might need help," he said simply. She looked into his eyes and saw the same determination she remembered from years ago. The kind of compassion that didn't need applause. She nodded reluctantly. "I'm coming with you." Within minutes, they were rowing toward the debris. Seagulls circled above, crying loudly, the air thick with salt and uncertainty. Every splash of the oars echoed against the cliffs. The closer they got, the more pieces they saw. Broken glass, torn fabric, a small red cooler. Then, just ahead, something moved. "There," Sandra whispered. Floating on the surface, half-conscious, was a man clinging to a wooden plank. Keanu paddled faster, water splashing against his arms. They reached him within moments. The man was bruised, weak, and mumbling incoherently. Keanu leaned over, grabbing his arm and pulling him onto the dinghy. Sandra helped lift his head, wrapping a towel around him. "He's breathing," she said softly. "Thank God!" The man coughed violently, his eyes fluttering open. "My wife, my daughter," he gasped. Keanu froze. "Where are they?" The man tried to point toward the cliffs, but his hand trembled. Keanu followed the direction with his eyes. Toward a narrow rocky path at the base of the cliffs, half hidden by mist. "We'll find them," he said firmly. "Hold on." As they rowed back toward the yacht, Sandra glanced at Keanu. She saw something change in him, like the peace he had been searching for was suddenly replaced by purpose. It wasn't just a rescue. It was something deeper. Maybe fate had brought them here, not for rest, but for redemption. The rescued man drifted in and out of consciousness, whispering names neither of them recognized. The captain helped lift him aboard and immediately started checking for radio signals. The distress frequency was empty. No response, no Coast Guard signal, nothing. "Storm passed last night," the captain said grimly. "Might have been a small fishing boat." "We're the first ones here." Keanu wiped his hands, looking out at the cliffs again. "We're not leaving until we know what happened." Sandra stood beside him, wind pushing her hair across her face. "You really think they're still out there?" His voice was quiet but steady. "Hope doesn't drown easily." The yacht drifted closer to the rocky edge as the sky dimmed slightly, clouds gathering in the distance. Seagulls screeched louder and the waves slapped harder against the rocks. Sandra's heart pounded, not from fear of the sea, but from the unknown waiting near those cliffs. And as the first drops of rain began to fall, Keanu looked at her and said, "Whatever happens, we don't turn away." The camera of the mind zooms out. The vast ocean. The cliffs ahead. The yacht small but determined against the coming storm. What began as a peaceful journey was now turning into something else entirely. And in that still moment, as thunder rumbled faintly in the distance, Sandra whispered to herself, "This trip was never just about peace, was it?" The answer came not in words, but in the sound of the waves rising higher, carrying a faint, distant cry that no one could mistake. The story had just begun. Whispers beneath the tide, the rain thickened as the yacht anchored near the cliffs. Gray clouds rolled across the sky, and the once golden horizon turned into a curtain of silver mist. Thunder echoed faintly, distant but growing. Keanu Reeves stood on the deck, his clothes damp from sea spray, eyes fixed on the jagged rocks ahead. He could still hear the weak cries of the man they had rescued echoing in his head. "My wife, my daughter." Sandra Bullock joined him, her expression tense but steady. She had known Keanu long enough to understand that when he made a promise, He meant it. But this time, something in his gaze carried more than resolve. It carried guilt, and maybe a need to atone for something unseen. "The Coast Guard still hasn't replied," the captain said, lowering the radio. "Signal's weak in this weather." Keanu nodded slowly. "We'll have to search on foot," the captain frowned. "The cliffs are dangerous in the rain. One wrong step? Then we'll be careful," Keanu interrupted gently. "There's a family out there." Sandra placed her hand on the railing, rain streaking down her wrist. "I'll go with him," she said, her tone firm. "We'll move along the lower rocks and signal if we find anything." The old sailor sighed, but handed Keanu a flashlight and a coiled rope. "The sea gives warnings," he said quietly. "Listen when it does." Keanu nodded, then turned toward Sandra. "Ready?" She smiled faintly, though her eyes betrayed worry. "You're asking me that after all we've been through?" Together, they climbed into the dinghy again. Rain drummed on the surface as they rowed toward the base of the cliffs. The air smelled of salt and iron, and the water grew darker the closer they came. Keanu's hands gripped the oars tightly, his muscles moving with practiced rhythm. When they reached the rocky edge, he jumped out first, steadying the boat for Sandra. She followed, clutching the flashlight. The rocks were slick, covered in moss and seaweed. Waves crashed nearby, spraying cold mist across their faces. They began climbing slowly, searching every crevice and ledge. Keanu's mind was focused, but deep inside, a voice whispered something he had been trying to ignore. Memories of another time, another rescue that had gone wrong. He had once tried to save a stranger from an accident years ago, but the man hadn't survived. Since then, he had carried the silence of that moment like a scar. "Over here," Sandra called out suddenly. She pointed toward a narrow shelf halfway up the cliff. Caught between two rocks was a piece of torn fabric, bright pink, fluttering weakly in the wind. They climbed carefully toward it. When Keanu reached the fabric, he realized it was part of a child's jacket. His chest tightened. "She was here," he said quietly. "Look," Sandra whispered, shining the flashlight downward. Below them, wedged between rocks, was a small satchel. It was soaked but intact. Keanu reached down and pulled it out, water dripping from its edges. Inside were a few belongings: a small stuffed toy dolphin, a photograph of the man they had rescued, and a woman smiling beside a little girl. Sandra's voice softened. "This must be his family." Keanu stared at the photo, rain blurring the image slightly. The woman's eyes were kind, full of life. The child looked no older than 7. "We have to find them," he said firmly. The wind howled louder as thunder rolled closer. The tide was rising, pushing waves harder against the rocks. "We can't go further up," Sandra said, glancing at the steep slope. "Too slippery." Keanu nodded, scanning the edge where the cliff met the sea. A narrow cave opening appeared beneath one section, half hidden by sea foam. "There," he said. They climbed down carefully, timing their movements between crashing waves. When they reached the entrance, the air grew colder. Keanu turned on the flashlight and stepped inside. The cave smelled of salt, damp stone, and something faintly metallic. "Hello?" he called out. His voice echoed through the hollow darkness. No reply. They moved deeper, water pooling around their ankles. The beam of the flashlight flickered over broken wood and tangled nets. Then Sandra froze. "Keanu, look." Near the far wall lay a small figure wrapped in a blanket. Beside her, a woman slumped against the rock, unconscious but breathing faintly. The little girl stirred weakly when the light touched her face. Sandra rushed forward, kneeling beside them. "They're alive," she said in disbelief. "Keanu, they're alive." Keanu dropped beside her, checking the woman's pulse. It was faint but steady. Relief flooded through him. He gently lifted the child into his arms. Her lips were blue from cold, but her eyes fluttered open just enough to whisper something. "Daddy." Keanu's heart tightened. "We've got you," he said softly. "You're safe now." They carried the mother and daughter back toward the entrance, careful not to slip on the slick stone. Rain poured harder outside, and the wind roared through the cliffs. By the time they reached the dinghy, both were shivering. Back on the yacht, the captain helped lift them aboard. The rescued man, now awake, cried out when he saw his wife and daughter. He reached for them with trembling hands, whispering words of gratitude in broken breaths. Sandra stood nearby, her face wet, not just from the rain but from emotion. She glanced at Keanu, who stood silently watching the reunion. His clothes were drenched, his hair clinging to his forehead, but his eyes were calm, almost distant. The man turned to him, voice shaking. "You saved us." "All of us." Keanu shook his head gently. "The ocean just brought us together." They wrapped the family in blankets and gave them warm tea. The little girl held her toy dolphin tightly, smiling faintly at Sandra. For a moment, everything felt still again, like the storm had lost its power. But as the yacht began to move away from the cliffs, the captain frowned at his compass. The needle spun erratically. "Something's wrong," he muttered. "What is it?" Sandra asked. "The current," he said, eyes narrowing. "It's pulling us the wrong way." Keanu looked toward the sea. The waves had changed direction. Instead of moving toward the open ocean, they were curling inward, toward the cliffs again. And in the distance, faintly through the fog, a shape appeared. It looked like another boat. Small, half-submerged, its mast broken, a black flag tangled in its rigging. "That's not debris," Keanu said slowly. "That's a vessel." The captain's face went pale. "That's the same fishing boat the family must have been on." Sandra frowned. "But if it's there, and the family drifted all the way here, then something else happened," Keanu finished quietly. The man they had rescued stirred suddenly, panic flashing in his eyes. "No," he said hoarsely. "Don't go near it. We tried to signal for help, but the men on that boat, they didn't want to be found." Silence filled the air. Sandra exchanged a glance with Keanu. The storm outside rumbled again, louder this time. The calm they had briefly felt was gone. Keanu stepped closer to the window, eyes narrowing at the distant shape. Lightning flashed for a split second, illuminating the wreck, and what looked like movement on its deck. Someone, or something, was still out there. He turned to Sandra, his voice steady. "This isn't over." And as the thunder rolled across the sea, the waves began to rise again, circling the yacht like restless ghosts of the tide. The peace they had sought had turned into a mystery that ran deeper than the ocean itself. Echoes of the wreck, the storm rolled deeper into the night, its roar blending with the sound of crashing waves. Flashes of lightning illuminated the dark sky, each strike revealing brief glimpses of the mysterious vessel drifting nearby. Keanu Reeves stood at the bow of the yacht, his wet hair clinging to his face, eyes locked on the wreck. Rain fell in cold sheets, but he barely felt it. His instincts told him something wasn't right. Behind him, Sandra Bullock tightened her jacket and walked closer, shielding her eyes from the wind. "We shouldn't go there tonight," she said. "The sea's too violent." Keanu didn't turn. "If someone's alive, they won't last until morning." The captain approached, his face grim. "He's right about the danger, but I've been at sea for 40 years, and I've seen things happen out there that don't make sense. Sometimes it's better to wait." Keanu looked toward the small family resting inside the cabin. The rescued man was asleep, his arm around his daughter. His wife lay beside him, breathing shallowly. They were safe for now, but the fear in the man's warning still echoed in Keanu's mind. "The men on that boat didn't want to be found. I'll go alone if I have to," he said quietly. Sandra stepped in front of him, blocking his path. "No, you won't. If you're going, I'm coming too." Lightning cracked across the sky, followed by a boom that shook the air. The ocean swelled, rocking the yacht violently. The captain cursed under his breath, gripping the wheel. "We've got maybe 20 minutes before this storm turns full." "Then we use those 20, Keanu said. He grabbed a waterproof lantern and the rescue rope. Sandra followed, slipping on a raincoat. Their eyes met briefly. No words, just a shared understanding. This wasn't just about saving someone. It was about finding out why this happened. They lowered the dinghy again, waves tossing it like a toy. The captain shouted warnings over the wind, but his voice faded as they drifted toward the dark silhouette of the wrecked boat. Lightning illuminated its side for a moment, splintered wood, rusted metal, and a strange marking painted in faded red. "What's that?" Sandra asked, pointing. Keanu focused the lantern. The letters were smudged, but still legible. It says, "The Lucent Star." Sounds like a fishing boat name, she said, though her tone carried uncertainty. Maybe, he replied. But those aren't fishing nets. As they drew closer, the light revealed something that made both their stomachs tighten. The deck was scattered with metal crates, ropes, and fuel drums, not the kind used for fishing. One drum had a warning symbol on it. Chemicals, Keanu muttered. This wasn't a family trip. They were transporting something. They tied the dinghy to the side ladder and climbed aboard carefully. The wood creaked beneath their feet. Every sound felt amplified in the storm. The wind whistling through the broken mast, the waves slapping against the hull, the faint creak of metal below deck. Sandra held the lantern high, sweeping its beam across the deck. No bodies, she said softly. No crew. Someone cleared this place, Keanu said. Or someone's still here. As if on cue, a faint sound came from below deck. A metallic clang, followed by shuffling footsteps. Sandra froze. Did you hear that? Keanu raised his hand for silence, then slowly moved toward the entrance hatch. The old metal door hung crooked, its hinges screeching as he pushed it open. Darkness yawned below, thick and suffocating. They descended the narrow staircase, each step echoing through the hollow vessel. The air grew heavy, filled with the smell of oil and salt. Faint water dripped from somewhere, tapping in an uneven rhythm. When they reached the lower hold, the lantern light fell upon more crates, some broken open, revealing small sealed containers marked with numbers. Sandra bent down and brushed away a wet tarp. Inside, one of the open boxes were glass vials filled with clear liquid. "This isn't fishing equipment," she whispered. Keanu picked up one of the vials carefully, examining the label. It had faded, but one word remained visible. Toxic. His eyes darkened. They were smuggling illegal materials. Before he could say more, a sound came from the shadows behind them. A low cough, followed by a voice. "Don't move!" A man stepped into the lantern light holding a small flare gun. His clothes were soaked, his face thin and exhausted, but his eyes were sharp. "Who are you?" he demanded. Keanu lifted his hand slowly. "We're not here to hurt anyone. We found a family, your passengers. They're alive." The man's expression flickered, confusion replacing hostility. "You found them?" Sandra nodded. "They're safe on our yacht. We came looking for others." The man lowered the flare slightly, his hands trembling. "There were 6 of us," he said quietly. "The storm hit last night. The cargo shifted. We tried to call for help, but our radio, it was smashed." "Not by accident? You mean someone sabotaged it?" Keanu asked. The man nodded weakly. "Our captain didn't want anyone to find us. He said we'd gone too far, that if the Coast Guard came, it would ruin everything." "Where is he now?" Sandra asked. The man swallowed hard. He jumped. "Took the last lifeboat and left us to sink." Keanu's jaw tightened. "You stayed." "Someone had to," the man said bitterly. "But when I woke up, everyone else was gone. I thought I was the only one left." The lantern flickered, and Keanu noticed something behind the man, a corner of the room where the floor was cracked open. Seawater gushed slowly through the split wood. The ship was still sinking inch by inch. "We have to leave," Keanu said. "Now!" The man nodded, but before they could move, a loud bang echoed above them. The sound of boots on the deck. Someone else had just boarded the wreck. Sandra's eyes widened. "That's not the storm." Keanu extinguished the lantern's flame instantly, plunging them into darkness. They stood still, listening. Muffled voices came from above, rough and hurried. "Search the cargo hold!" one of them barked. "They couldn't have taken everything," Keanu whispered. "Smugglers." "They came back for what's left." The survivor looked terrified. "If they find me, they'll kill us all." Keanu's voice dropped to a whisper. "We'll get you out." They moved quietly toward the stairs, but footsteps echoed closer. Shadows appeared on the wall above them. Sandra grabbed Keanu's arm. "We're trapped!" Keanu scanned the room quickly, his eyes landing on a small maintenance hatch near the floor. "There," he whispered. They crawled through it one by one, the narrow tunnel leading toward the back of the ship. The survivor followed last, his breath shaky. Outside, lightning struck again, lighting up the sea through a broken porthole. As they emerged onto the rear deck, Keanu signaled to Sandra. "Head for the dinghy." She nodded, climbing down first. The waves thrashed violently, threatening to overturn the small boat. Keanu helped the survivor lower himself down, then followed, cutting the rope loose. Just as they drifted away, a shout came from the wreck. They're escaping!" Gunfire cracked through the storm, the sound piercing the night. Bullets hit the water near them, sending sprays of salt into their faces. Keanu rowed furiously, muscles burning, the lightning illuminating his determined face. Sandra shielded the survivor, her arms wrapped tightly around him. "Faster!" she cried. The wreck grew smaller behind them, swallowed by the storm. The shouts faded, replaced by the sound of thunder and the pounding rain. By the time they reached the yacht, their arms were numb, their breaths ragged. The captain helped them aboard, his eyes wide. "What happened?" "It wasn't an accident," Keanu said between breaths. "That ship was carrying something dangerous, and someone wanted it to disappear." Sandra looked toward the rescued family. The little girl slept peacefully, unaware of the chaos that had nearly claimed them. "We can't tell the authorities yet," the captain said quietly. "Not until we're sure who's behind it. People with power hide behind storms like this." Keanu looked out at the horizon. The storm was beginning to fade, but the weight of what they'd discovered pressed heavier than ever. "We're going to find the truth," he said softly, "no matter how deep it's buried." As dawn began to break, faint light touched the sea again. The ocean looked calm, almost innocent, as if nothing had happened. But somewhere beneath the waves, the wreck of the lucent star sank slowly, carrying its secrets into the deep. Keanu knew this was only the beginning, and as the sun rose behind the thinning clouds, the faint reflection of the broken ship gleamed for the last time before vanishing completely, like a ghost swallowed by its own sins. Shadows over calm water, the morning after the storm felt strangely still. The waves, once wild and furious, now shimmered gently beneath a pale sunrise. The sky glowed soft orange, as though the sea had decided to forget what had happened. But Keanu Reeves couldn't forget. Not the broken wreck, not the men with weapons, and not the fear he had seen in the survivors' eyes. The yacht drifted quietly now, engines humming low as the captain steered toward open waters. Sandra Bullock stood near the railing, the wind brushing her hair as she stared at the endless ocean. She wanted to feel peace, but every time she closed her eyes, she saw flashes of the gunfire, the faces of the smugglers, and the little girl sleeping without knowing how close death had come. Keanu joined her, carrying 2 mugs of hot tea. His clothes were clean but wrinkled, and dark circles framed his calm eyes. He handed her 1 mug and leaned beside her silently. For a moment, neither spoke. Finally, Sandra broke the silence. "Do you think they'll come after us?" Keanu took a slow sip, his gaze still fixed on the horizon. "If the cargo was worth enough, yes." The words hung heavy in the morning air. Inside the cabin, the rescued family rested together. The man, whose name they had learned was Daniel, sat by his wife's side, holding her hand tightly. She was still weak but stable. Their daughter, Emma, drew small shapes on the fogged window with her finger, tiny hearts and circles. The survivor they had found on the wreck sat alone near the back of the cabin. His name was Elias. He was a marine biologist, or so he said, hired to monitor the chemicals being transported. But as Keanu listened to his fragmented story, he realized there were gaps, things Elias wasn't saying. After breakfast, Keanu sat across from him at the small wooden table. Sandra joined quietly, notebook in hand. "You said the ship's captain sabotaged the radio," Keanu began. "Why?" Elias hesitated, his fingers tapping nervously on the mug in front of him. "He said we were carrying something that couldn't be reported. That if the Coast Guard found out, he'd lose everything." "What was it?" Sandra asked gently. The man lowered his gaze. "They told me it was industrial waste, non-lethal chemicals for disposal. But when one of the barrels cracked open, the fumes burned through my gloves." He paused, swallowing hard. "I realized it was something else, something dangerous." Keanu frowned. "So they were dumping illegal toxins into the sea?" Elias nodded weakly. "I think they were paid to, by a corporation that didn't want to handle disposal costs. The captain called them the sponsors." Sandra leaned forward. Do you have proof? Elias looked up slowly. Maybe. I kept one vial. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small glass tube wrapped in cloth. Inside shimmered a faint blue liquid. That's what they were carrying, he whispered. I don't even know what it is, but it reacts to salt water. The captain said if it leaks in large amounts, it could poison everything within miles. Keanu stared at the vial for a long moment. The liquid glowed faintly under the sunlight streaming through the cabin window. It looked calm, beautiful even, but something about it felt wrong. You realize, Sandra said softly, this isn't just a crime. This could destroy ecosystems, Elias nodded, and the people funding it will do anything to erase evidence. Outside, the wind shifted slightly. The ocean, once serene, began to ripple again. The captain stepped in, his expression uneasy. We're being followed. Everyone turned to look. On the far horizon, a small black dot cut through the waves. As the light hit it, they could see the outline of another boat, sleek, dark, and moving fast. Keanu's voice remained calm, though his jaw tightened. How far? 5 miles and closing, the captain said. No identification signal. Sandra's heart began to race. It's them, isn't it? Elias's face went pale. They found us. Keanu moved quickly. Captain, change course east. There's a cluster of small islands near here, right? Aye, the captain said, turning the wheel sharply. The yacht cut across the waves, its engine rumbling louder. The air grew tense, everyone silent except for the rhythmic crash of the sea. Sandra stayed beside Keanu, helping the family secure themselves inside. Emma clutched her dolphin toy tightly, her small eyes wide with confusion. Are we in danger? She whispered. Sandra knelt beside her, forcing a soft smile. No, sweetheart. We're just going on another little ride. The girl nodded, trusting her completely. Outside, the dark boat drew closer, slicing through the waves with precision. Through binoculars, Keanu saw 2 men on deck, both wearing black raincoats, both armed. They weren't rescuers. They'll try to board, he said quietly. The captain gritted his teeth. This yacht isn't built for a chase. Then we make it one, Keanu said. He ran toward the side rail, grabbed a length of spare rope, and secured it around the mast. Sandra followed, watching him with both fear and admiration. You're not thinking of doing something reckless, are you? He gave a small half-smile. Only if it works. As the pursuers gained distance, Keanu climbed halfway up the mast, his body swaying with the movement of the boat. Rain began to fall again, light but cold. When the enemy vessel came within 100 meters, one of the men raised a flare gun, signaling for them to stop. Keanu shouted back, "You're trespassing on private waters." The man laughed over the storm. "Hand over the scientist and the sample and we'll let you live." Sandra's heart pounded. "They want Elias." Keanu's eyes hardened. They're not getting him. The enemy vessel pulled closer. One of the men jumped across the narrow gap, landing on the yacht's deck with a thud. He was large, wearing gloves and a black hood. Sandra gasped as he advanced. Keanu dropped down from the mast, landing silently behind him. The man swung around just in time to block a punch, but Keanu moved faster, grabbing the man's wrist, twisting and forcing the flare gun to fall. They struggled, crashing against the rail. "Keanu!" Sandra shouted, grabbing the flare gun and aiming it at the approaching boat. Keanu disarmed the intruder, knocking him unconscious with a swift strike. Without hesitation, Sandra fired the flare. Not at the men, but into the water in front of their vessel. The bright red light exploded in a cloud of smoke, blinding them temporarily. The captain steered sharply to the right, cutting through a cluster of shallow reefs. The enemy boat, unable to react in time, scraped violently against hidden rocks, slowing to a crawl. "We've got a head start," the captain shouted. Sandra exhaled in relief. Keanu caught his breath, checking the fallen man. "Tie him," he said. They bound the intruder's hands and dragged him into the cabin. When he woke minutes later, his glare was full of hatred but also fear. "Who sent you?" Keanu asked. The man spat at the floor. "You think you can stop this? You have no idea who you're dealing with." Sandra leaned forward. "Then tell us." The man smirked darkly. "You ever heard of Orion?" The name meant nothing to her, but Keanu's eyes narrowed slightly. "They're behind this?" The man laughed. They are this. They own the ships, the labs, the people. You can't fight a shadow that owns the light." Keanu stared at him, silent as the yacht cut through the churning water. For a brief moment, lightning flashed again, bright, white, and merciless. It lit up Keanu's face, calm but fierce. "We'll see about that," he said quietly. By the time night fell again, the yacht reached a small cove surrounded by jagged cliffs. The sea was calm, the air heavy with the scent of salt and rain. They anchored near the rocks, hidden from open view. Everyone gathered inside, exhausted but alert. Sandra looked at Keanu across the dimly lit cabin. "You knew that name, Orion. Who are they?" Keanu leaned back, his voice low. "A private conglomerate. They fund research, tech, and logistics. But some of their ships go missing, like the Lucent Star. I heard rumors years ago. They dispose of what others want to hide." "And now we have evidence," she said, glancing at the glowing vial. "Evidence they'll kill for," he replied. The storm had passed, but tension filled the air. Outside, the waves lapped gently against the hull, deceptively peaceful. Keanu stood, walking toward the small window, staring at the faint reflection of his face in the glass. "We have two choices," he said. "We can run and stay silent. Or we can go back, tell the world what happened, and risk everything." Sandra's voice was quiet but firm. "You already know what you're going to do." He turned toward her, a small, tired smile crossing his face. "Yeah, but this time I won't do it alone." Their eyes met. The kind of look that carried history, trust, respect, and unspoken courage. Outside, thunder rumbled again in the far distance. "Like a warning from the sea itself," Keanu whispered. Almost to himself, peace was never the real journey. Truth was. And far beyond the cliffs, in the direction of the horizon, a faint red light blinked in the fog, an unseen signal from another ship watching them from miles away. They weren't alone anymore. The island of silence. The sky darkened again that evening, but not with rain. It was dusk, the kind of fading light that made the ocean look endless and secretive. Keanu Reeves stood at the front of the yacht, binoculars in hand, staring toward a small, dark shape rising from the water. An island. "Is that it?" Sandra Bullock asked, stepping beside him. He nodded slowly. "According to the coordinates the captain found, yes. Elias said Orion used remote locations to hide operations. This fits the pattern. No signal, no nearby ports." The captain cut the engine, letting the yacht drift silently closer. The island looked deserted from afar, covered in dense trees and sharp cliffs. But as the light shifted, Keanu spotted something metallic glinting near the shoreline, a communications tower, half hidden behind foliage. "They're here," he said softly. The rescued family stayed below deck, hidden and quiet. Elias joined them on the bridge, clutching a small waterproof case that held the vial of toxic liquid. His hands trembled slightly, but his voice was steady. "That tower's definitely Orion's. They use signal jammers disguised as research antennas." "How far can it reach?" Sandra asked. "Far enough to block every call for help within 50 miles, he said. "It's how they keep their work invisible." Keanu turned to the captain. "Can you anchor here and keep watch?" The old sailor nodded. "I'll be ready if things go wrong." Keanu packed a small backpack with essentials: rope, flashlight, and a portable recorder. He handed Sandra a smaller bag with a flare gun and first aid kit. "We go in, get proof, and get out," he said. She met his gaze. "And if they catch us?" He gave a faint smile. "Then we improvise." They lowered the dinghy again and paddled toward the shore. The island smelled of wet earth and salt. Waves lapped softly against black rocks as their boots sank into the sand. Everything was quiet, except for the faint hum of electricity coming from somewhere deeper in the forest. They moved through the trees, careful not to break branches. The air grew thicker, the sound of insects louder. After about 15 minutes, they reached a clearing. What they saw there made both stop cold. A large metal facility stood hidden beneath the canopy. Fences wrapped in barbed wire, dim lights glowing through the fog. Trucks were parked outside, their logos faded but still visible. Orion Logistics Division. Workers moved between structures, wearing white protective suits. "This isn't research," Sandra whispered. "It's disposal." Keanu crouched low, observing the activity. One worker carried a barrel similar to the ones they had seen on the Lucent Star. Another unloaded crates marked with radiation symbols. Near the edge of the compound, a small dock led to a row of old cargo containers, sealed tight. Elias whispered, "Those containers are filled with chemical waste. They dump them during storms when Coast Guard patrols are low." Keanu's jaw tightened. "We're recording everything." They moved quietly to higher ground. From there, Sandra filmed the facility with the small camera from her bag. Keanu recorded sound, the hum of machines, the clang of barrels, the muffled voices of workers speaking about shipment delays and payment schedules. Then, suddenly, headlights flared in the distance. A jeep drove up the dirt path and stopped at the main gate. 2 guards stepped out, opening the barrier for a tall man in a black coat. He walked with slow confidence, his voice sharp and clear even from far away. "Keep the schedule tight," he barked. "The authorities can't trace another spill." Elias went pale. "That's him, the Orion director." Keanu's eyes narrowed. "The one who left your crew to die." The man's coat flapped in the wind as he lit a cigarette. His face was cold, expressionless, the kind of man who saw oceans as containers, not living things. Keanu whispered to Sandra, "We have what we need. Let's move." But as they turned, a branch cracked under her boot. Instantly, 2 guards near the gate turned toward the sound. Flashlights cut through the darkness. "Who's there?" one shouted. Keanu grabbed Sandra's hand and pulled her behind a tree. The beams swept inches from their faces. "Over there!" a voice yelled. They ran. Through mud, through vines, hearts pounding. Gunfire erupted behind them, bullets tearing through leaves. Keanu's grip tightened around her wrist as they dove behind a boulder. "We're too exposed," Sandra gasped. "Keep moving," he said. They sprinted downhill toward the beach, flashlights chasing them through the dark. The sound of dogs echoed in the distance. The ocean came into view, black, restless, and waiting. Just as they reached the shore, a voice shouted, "Stop right there!" 3 guards emerged from the trees, weapons drawn. The director followed slowly, cigarette still glowing between his fingers. "I must admit," he said coolly, "I didn't expect you to be the ones causing trouble, Mr. Reeves." Keanu's eyes hardened. "You left innocent people to die at sea." "Collateral damage," the man replied calmly. "Sometimes progress demands silence." Sandra stepped forward, her voice trembling with controlled anger. "You call poisoning the ocean progress?" The man smirked. "What we do keeps industries alive, and people like you, actors playing heroes, wouldn't understand the cost of real work." Keanu's jaw clenched. "Maybe you should find out." He reached into his pocket, pretending to adjust his hand. The director frowned, but before he could react, Keanu flung a handful of sand into the nearest guard's face. The man stumbled, firing blindly. Keanu tackled him, twisting the gun away, and threw him into another guard. Sandra fired a flare straight into the sky, a blinding red light that cut through the night. It wasn't just a distress signal, it was a warning. The captain saw it from the yacht instantly. "They need help," he muttered, starting the engine. On shore, chaos erupted. Guards shouted, flashes of gunfire lighting the trees. Keanu grabbed Sandra's hand again, pulling her toward the water. "Go!" he yelled. They waded into the surf, waves crashing around their legs. The yacht's lights appeared faintly in the distance. Keanu turned back once. The director stood at the edge of the forest, watching them, expression cold but unmoved. He shouted something to his men, but the wind drowned his words. As Keanu and Sandra reached the dinghy, Elias was already rowing toward them. "Get in!" he shouted. Bullets hit the water around them, but the waves carried them faster. By the time the guards reached the shore, the dinghy had disappeared into the darkness. When they climbed aboard the yacht, everyone was silent, breathing hard, soaked to the bone. Sandra fell to her knees, trembling but alive. Keanu stood, watching the island fade behind them, the flare's last glow reflecting in his eyes. Elias pulled the waterproof recorder from his pocket, shaking it. "It's all here. Video, audio, everything." Keanu nodded slowly. "Then they can't hide anymore." But deep inside, he knew this wasn't the end. Orion wasn't a man or a single island. It was a system, a shadow cast across the world. And once you challenged a shadow, it always came back for the light. Sandra looked at him quietly. "What now?" He exhaled, voice calm but firm. "We go public, and we don't stop until they're exposed." Outside, dawn began to rise, faint, golden, and defiant against the darkness behind them. But miles away, back on the island, the Orion director made a phone call, his voice flat. "They have the evidence," he said. "Follow them, and if necessary, sink the truth before it reaches land." Truth against the tide, the horizon glowed pale gold as the yacht sailed away from the island. The air was still heavy with salt, smoke, and fear. Keanu Reeves stood at the bow, eyes fixed on the distant dawn, his clothes soaked and torn from the escape. Sandra Bullock sat beside him, her hands trembling as she reviewed the camera footage. Every frame they'd captured showed the truth. Orion's facility, the barrels, the workers, the director's face. It was everything they needed and everything that could get them killed. Elias sat inside the cabin, hunched over the recorder. "The data's intact," he said quietly. "But they'll jam every signal before we can transmit. They'll want to erase us before morning." Keanu turned to the captain. "How far to the mainland?" 5 hours at full speed," the old sailor said, checking the compass. "But we'll be on open water. If Orion's ships are following, we'll have no cover." Sandra lifted her gaze. "Then we don't run. We make them chase us where everyone can see." Keanu looked at her, understanding dawning slowly. "You mean live broadcast?" "Exactly," she said. "If we go public in real time, they can't stop it. Even if they find us, the world will already know." Elias hesitated. "But they're signal jammers. We bypass them," Keanu interrupted. "The captain's old radio still works on analog frequencies. They can't block every channel." The captain frowned but nodded. "You'll get maybe 10 minutes of open air before they triangulate." 10 minutes is enough," Keanu said. They gathered everything, footage, audio, and the vial. Elias set up the old transmitter near the deck while Sandra adjusted the camera and light. Keanu took a deep breath and looked into the lens. "You sure you're ready?" she asked softly. He gave a faint smile. "We've come too far not to be." The captain flipped the radio switch. Static filled the air, then cleared. "You're live," he said. Keanu stepped forward, his voice calm but resolute. "This is Keanu Reeves. If you're hearing this, it's because someone tried to make sure you wouldn't." He paused, eyes steady on the lens. "Out here, in the Indian Ocean, we discovered a facility operated by a private organization known as Orion. They're dumping toxic waste into our waters, hiding behind storms, using silence as their shield. We have the proof, and we're sharing it now." Sandra switched the feed, showing the footage, the barrels, the workers, the hidden island glowing in the dawn light. Keanu continued, his tone quiet but sharp. "The people behind this think power means protection. They think they can drown truth. But the sea remembers, and it gives back everything you try to bury." The yacht cut through the waves, the radio crackling as the transmission reached nearby ships, Coast Guard frequencies, and eventually civilian networks. On the mainland, newsrooms began to pick up the signal. Reporters alerting anchors in confusion. Keanu Reeves lived from the ocean, exposing a secret operation. But before they could celebrate, the captain's face turned pale. "Incoming vessel," he said. "Fast." Sandra looked through the binoculars. "It's Orion." The black ship appeared behind them, slicing through the waves like a shadow made of steel. Its engines roared, water spraying high into the air. "How long till they reach us?" Keanu asked. Less than 5 minutes. Elias clutched the recorder. If they board, they'll destroy everything. Keanu turned to the captain. Can we broadcast one final signal burst? We can, the captain said, but it'll overload the system. Do it, Keanu said. Send everything. The engines of the Orion vessel thundered closer. Sandra stood beside Keanu, holding the camera steady. The wind whipped through her hair, but her voice didn't shake. If this is our last message, make it count. Keanu looked straight into the lens, rain starting to fall again. To those watching, this isn't about fame or fear. It's about responsibility. Every drop of water, every living thing depends on what we do next. Truth isn't safe, but it's necessary. And even if they silence us, someone will hear this. Someone always does. The Orion ship fired a warning flare. It streaked across the sky, burning red. The captain shouted, "They're closing in!" Keanu turned to Sandra and Elias. "Get below deck. I'll handle the rest." "Keanu, no," Sandra said, grabbing his arm. "We stay together." He looked at her, the faintest smile on his lips. "Then let's finish this together." The ship's radio hissed with interference. "Shut it down," a voice ordered, the Orion director. "Now or we'll sink you." Keanu pressed the transmit button harder. "You can sink a ship," he said into the mic. "But you can't sink the truth." Then he nodded to the captain. The old sailor flipped the final switch. The yacht's antenna crackled, sparks flying as the transmitter overloaded. A high-pitched whine filled the air, then burst into a flood of static, carrying their broadcast to every open frequency. On the Orion ship, the director shouted in frustration, "Cut the signal, cut it!" But it was too late. The footage, the recordings, and Keanu's words had already gone global. The yacht shook violently as waves slammed against it. Smoke poured from the radio unit. Sandra grabbed Keanu's arm as the captain shouted, "We've lost power!" The Orion ship circled closer. Armed men stood on its deck, ready to board. Then suddenly a second voice echoed over the radio. "Not Orions. This is Coast Guard Command," it said. "Stand down immediately." Searchlights pierced the dawn fog. 2 large Coast Guard vessels appeared from the east, sirens wailing. Helicopters circled above. The Orion ship froze mid-turn, engines rumbling uncertainly. Keanu's heart pounded as he realized the broadcast had worked. The Coast Guard hailed the yacht first. "Mr. Reeves, Ms. Bullock, we received your transmission. You're safe now. Stay put." The Orion vessel tried to retreat, but the Coast Guard blocked its path. Within minutes, the black ship was surrounded. On deck, Sandra let out a long breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Tears mixed with the rain on her face. "We did it," she whispered. Keanu nodded slowly, watching the sunlight break through the clouds. "No," he said softly. "You did it. We all did." Hours later, as the Coast Guard escorted them back to port, the world was already changing. Major networks replayed their footage. Journalists uncovered more links to Orion's secret operations. Governments issued investigations. And across social media, people shared one phrase again and again: "You can't drown the truth." When the yacht finally reached the harbor, crowds were waiting. Reporters, rescue teams, and ordinary people lined the docks. Some cheered, some cried. Others simply stood in silence. Keanu stepped off the boat, helping Sandra down. Elias followed, holding the recorder close to his chest. The rescued family walked behind them, hand in hand, free at last. A young reporter approached, microphone trembling. "Mr. Reeves, why risk your life for this?" Keanu paused, looking out at the sea one last time. Waves glimmered beneath the morning sun, calm and endless. "Because," he said quietly, "peace doesn't come from silence. It comes from doing what's right, even when it hurts." The camera lights flashed. The crowd cheered softly, and somewhere behind them, a small gull took flight, soaring high above the harbor, disappearing into the endless blue. For the first time in days, Keanu closed his eyes and smiled. The ocean was quiet again, not because it was hiding secrets, but because it had finally been heard.